Hi makers, I'm Alexandra with Minerva. Today we're going to be doing a sew along for Billie, Tilly and the Buttons, famous Billie dress and top. And makers, I'm going to be doing version 3, which has the regular sleeve. But of course, if you want to try the balloon sleeve, I will also be showing you today how to make the balloon sleeve on the Billie. And makers, before I tell you what's included in the sewing kit, I want to remind you to sign up for a Minerva Craft Club account. You get a discount on all your orders for 12 months. And of course, don't forget to join us on our website with a free account where you get to share your makes, talk to other makers around the world, and grab loads of inspiration makers. And of course, I am actually wearing my Billie dress, and this is part of Minerva's core range cable textured knit, and this color is called Grape. It is actually part of our many colorways that we have in this fabric. All right, makers, let's go to the design table so I can show you what else is included in this sewing kit. Hi makers, today we're going to be working on a sew along for Billie from Tilly and the Buttons. And makers, this is a pattern that is rated for confident beginners, but as we know, it's rated for everybody. Such a great pattern, and makers, you can hack this pattern in so many ways. Let me show you. So I'm going to be working on view 3, the regular sleeve dress. But I am also going to be showing you how to do the balloon sleeve if you decide that you want to have a balloon sleeve for your Billie. And also, this is part of our sewing kits, which includes a set of jersey needles. You also get matching thread, clear elastic, which makers you are always going to need for all of your knits. So something to always have when you're working with knits. And of course, this is part of Minerva's core range stretch knit, and I am using the Grape colorway, but we have this on our website in many different colors, so please take a look at that. I'm going to be showing you the pattern pieces you're going to need. You're going to need the Billie pocket facing. You're going to cut 2, and of course you're only going to need this if you're doing the dress version. Also going to need the pocket bag, and you're going to cut 2. You're also going to need the neckband, and makers, I want to make sure that you cut this on the fold. You're also going to need the hem band, and you're going to cut 2 on the fold. You're also going to need the front bodice, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. You're also going to need the back bodice, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. And again, makers, I'm making view number 3, which the regular sleeves. So you're going to cut 2 pattern pieces for the regular sleeve. And makers, I want to point out that when you get your pattern, the sleeve part has 2 sleeve parts, so you need to join that right there. So make sure you do that. Again, this is a regular sleeve, and since I'm doing the regular sleeve, I'm going to need to cut 2 of the regular sleeve cuff. And makers, again, I told you I'm going to show you how to do the balloon sleeve. If you are going to be doing the balloon sleeve, you need to have the correct sleeve pattern, and this is the balloon sleeve. You're going to cut 2, and then make sure that you have the correct sleeve cuff pattern piece, and that is the balloon sleeve cuff. You're going to need 2. All right, makers, let's get started. Makers, we're going to be working with knits, and we have to make sure that we use the right stitch when working with knits. I know that this is really hard to see in the camera because the folks that packed my my sewing kit did an amazing job matching my thread. Awesome, but I'm going to show you on this side. So I'm using a straight stitch right there. Do not use a straight stitch. What happens is when your knit starts stretching over time, those seams are going to pop. So again, do not use a straight stitch with knits. Don't do it. you really want to use a zigzag stitch or a narrow zigzag stitch. What's going to happen, your stitches are going to stretch with your knits and they are not going to pop over time. This straight stitch, whoop, there it goes. It popped. So you want to make sure that you are using a zigzag stitch or a narrow zigzag stitch anytime that you are sewing with knits. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you have the right tension on your machine and that you are using a narrow zigzag stitch. Makers, I want you to grab your bodice, front bodice piece, and I want you to grab your pocket facing. And you have notches. One notch right there. So I want to make sure that you pin, and then you have another notch. Then I want to make sure that you match that raw edge. Now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start. You're going to start, right? You're going to put that on your machine. You are going to measure 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 inch. So don't forget the back stitch at the start and all the way to the end. Go ahead and do that now for both left and right sides of your pocket. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and attached my pocket facings, and now the pattern's asking us to trim the seam allowance. So I'm going to do just that. Right? So makers, now what we want to do is we want to fold this towards the inside. But before we do, the pattern's asking us to understitch. So understitch means that we are going to be stitching the pocket facing to that seam allowance. And the whole point of this is that when we press our pocket facing towards the inside, so it doesn't roll towards the outside like it's doing right there. So again, I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to stitch again the pocket facing to that little bit of seam allowance that I have right there. And I'm going to stitch right there. I'm going to show you in the machine. All right, makers. So again, I am understitching my pocket facing to my seam allowance right there. Make sure that that seam allowance, it's towards the facing and not towards your bodice. And again, you are going to use a zigzag stitch for this, a narrow zigzag stitch. And I want you to do this for both pocket facings. Again, for both right and left pocket facings. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, I went ahead and did my understitching on my pocket facing, and I also went ahead and pressed it so it all stays towards the inside when I give it a press, right? And that's the whole reason why we do understitching. If we have a pocket facing, we want that fabric to stay towards the inside, not even peeking out. That's why we do it. So now I want you to grab your pocket and with right sides together. And notice how I'm only pinning the pocket facing to the pocket and not the entire bodice. So you have notches. You can match those. There's one right there. And again, I want you to do this for both sides. So now I want you to stitch 5/8 or 1.5 centimeters seam allowance all the way around, and then you back stitch at the start and at the end. Don't forget to do that for both pockets. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and stitched my pockets, and I also used my overlocker, right? So that's how they are fitting, right? And while I was on my sewing machine, I also went ahead and basted the sides of my pockets just because we are going to be sewing later on the sides and I want to make sure that this stays straight. So I did that for both pockets. There they are. So now I want you to grab your back piece. And I want you have 2 notches right there, or 1 notch right there. So I want you to pin. And I want you to pin on both sides. And makers, remember how in your sewing kit, you got some clear elastic. This is what I always want you to use when you have knits on your shoulders. I want you to grab some of this amazing elastic on your sewing kit right there. And you really want to make sure that you put that in. I'm cutting mine a little close, but I want you to stitch this right there where you are stitching on that seam allowance, so 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter. You really want to make sure that you stitch over that with your stretch stitch. What does that do? This reinforces our shoulder seams, and with knits, if you don't do this over time, they will stretch and distort your shoulders, and you really don't want that to happen. So that's why we do it. If you even look at some ready-to-wear clothing that you would buy in a store, if you look at the knits, under those overlapped stitches, you will see some elastic. So make sure you do that for both sides. Always on your knits, even if you have, for example, like a drop shoulder, grab some clear elastic and put it right there. Go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and stitch your shoulders and don't forget the elastic. Makers, so I went ahead and stitched my shoulders in, and I'm going to show you what they look like. That is what they look like. I went ahead and also overlocked my seams. They look like that on both sides. Let me show you. Right? So that's what they look like. I went ahead and pressed my seams towards the back. But now I want you to put this off to the side. And I want you to grab your neckband. And again, with right sides together, you have a notch. Go ahead and pin. And I want you to stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter. Go ahead and do that now. So makers, I went ahead and stitched my neckband, and we are meant to fold and press this, but makers, I usually get this little kind of like bump right there. So what I like to do is I like to grab, I have to get these sharpened, more like I'm worried about cutting my stitches, but I cut that fabric in the middle, right? So go ahead and cut that fabric in the middle. And now what happens when I fold this, I don't have that bulky bump right there. So once you do that, I want you to go ahead and press. Go ahead and do that now. And I want you to press. Again, wrong sides together for this because we are going to attach our neckline to our top. Makers, so I went ahead and pressed my neckband, and makers, I put a pin in the center back, right? And then I folded it, and that will be my center front. And then I met those two, center front, center back, and these are my sides, right? So I did that, and I do that because I need to know also on my pattern. I want to make sure that my neckband is distributed around the neckline correctly. So what I do is usually I start on the center front and pin. Put that pin over there. And then center back and pin, right? And if you notice, my neckband is not as big as my neck opening. That means that we're going to have to slightly stretch my neckband so it fits all around, but I'm going to do that on the sewing machine. For now, what we want to do is we want to make sure that it's all evenly distributed. And again, I'm doing right sides together, right? And the whole reason why your neckband needs to stretch is so you don't have any gaping. So see, this is too much right here. So I'm going to put a pin, kind of distribute this, because I'm going to have to, again, stretch my neckband to fit. So the other side. So again, right, see how much my neckband is not long enough. So in the sewing machine, we're going to have to stretch the neckband, not my bodice. Okay, super important. Again, neckband, not bodice. All right, makers, so we pinned that in, and now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters, and I want you to start at the back stitch all the way around. Again, remember, you need to use a zigzag stitch or a narrow zigzag. Remember, you're going to be putting this, pulling over your head, so it's going to have to stretch. Go ahead and do that now. I'm going to show you in the sewing machine how we're going to do this. Makers, I am attaching my neckband, and as you can see, my neck opening is a tad larger than my neckband. So I want to make sure that when I am stitching this in, that I slightly pull on my neckband. You do not want to pull on your opening on your bodice. You want to stretch your neckband. And again, when you're doing this, of course, I want you to use 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So makers, go ahead and do that now. Once you do that, I want you to give this a really good press. All right, makers, go ahead and attach your neckband now. Makers, so I went ahead and attached my neckband, and sometimes we have some neckband, some seam allowance that tends to creep up like that. So usually what we want to do is we want to top stitch that in. When I do that, I do a very narrow zigzag stitch on my machine, and I make this stitch length almost 4 millimeters, so it looks almost like I have a straight stitch. It's called a lightning bolt stitch. Some sewing machines have it, others don't. It's okay if you don't. If you do not, just go ahead and do a narrow zigzag stitch on your machine top stitching. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit more about neckbands and how you can really play with this and have some fun. The Billie pattern is such a great pattern for you to have. My goodness, I can think of just like 5 things off the bat that you can do with this pattern. That's why I'm telling you it's such a good one to have on your stash. But let's talk a little bit about neckbands. So in Tilly's pattern, she wants you to use a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, right? So perhaps you want to use a different color like a rib knit, but perhaps you don't want to show that much of a neckband. Then perhaps you want to just show half of the width of this neckband. If you want to do that, then what you would have to do is you would have to increase your seam allowance, and then a less of your neckband would show, right? That's one way. Also, our pattern also has a pattern, right? So I'm going to put this off to the side and I'm going to show you something. So we have the neckband and you have this that says place unfold, and that pretty much tells you where your grain line is at, right? But perhaps you're saying, well, maybe I just really want one of these beautiful textured designs on my neckband, and that is it. So the way that Tilly has you cutting your pattern, there's my selvage edge, right? So she really wants you to cut your pattern this way, right? She wants you cutting your pattern this way, and obviously, right, I don't have enough fabric here, but if I did, I would fold my pattern and, right, cut it that way. I would fold my pattern and cut it that way, which is what I did for my neckband right here. So I'm following the pattern. But like I mentioned, let's say that you just want to use that beautiful texture. So guys, for your knits, this is your grain, right? Your selvage edge. And the other direction is your cross grain. And with a knit, this is the part that stretches the most, all right? So, makers, just for knits. You can only do this for knits, okay? You can actually place your pattern piece this way and go ahead and cut that pattern. So when we put it back on our neckband, you would have that pattern right there. What am I talking about, right? If I cut it this way, then I would have this pattern going about along my neckline. That would look lovely, and you can get away with doing that when you are doing knits, only knits, right? So that's a little tidbit if you wanted to play with, for example, if you wanted to play with a pattern on your sweater knits, or you have perhaps stripes, you could have a lot of fun with that, and kind of like what I like to say, go rogue or break the rules. So that's a little tidbit for you today, but we're going to go back to this. So I have my neckband, and makers, I'm going to go ahead and show you right now how to top stitch it. But before I do, I have this awesome label, and I'm going to put it right there. There's my center. And makers, if you have fabric, like fabric adhesive or even hem tape, that's always a good way to put that in there, and then go ahead and top stitch it so your label does not move or get off center. That is most likely what I'll do. But makers, go ahead and top stitch your neckband seam allowance now. Go ahead and do that now. makers, so I did my top stitching on my neckband, right? And now it's stitched down, so it's not going to bother me when I wear my dress. It's not going to be poking me at all. So that's how you attach your neckband. But makers, now we're going to attach the sleeves. And makers, I'm going to show you both ways. So I want you to go ahead and open up your dress, and you have 2 notches, and you should have a notch on your front dress, and then your sleeve also has 1 notch for the front. You have a shoulder notch, right? And then you have 2 notches. So again, I have 2 notches, and that just means the back. And I'm going to go ahead and pin. And you really just want to go ahead and pin in your sleeve. And this is a really easy way to set in sleeves on a knit, right? Just match those notches. Make sure that your fabric is right sides together. Of course, looking for my center notch right there. And makers, if you have to use a lot of pins, don't be afraid to use lots of pins. It's okay if you do so. And again, keep pinning. And makers, I'm going to be using the regular sleeves, but I'm going to show you also how to do a balloon sleeve. But you're going to be attaching the balloon sleeves same exact way. You're just going to have gathers. All right. All right, makers, so once you've attached your sleeve, I want you to stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter all the way around, right? Don't forget the back stitch at the start and all the way to the end. Go ahead and do that now for your regular sleeve. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and attached my sleeve, and again, I'm attaching the regular sleeve, and let me show you. So you did a great job attaching the sleeve when you don't have any ripples or puckers on your sleeve, right? And makers, if you have a small pucker, just go ahead and unpick about 2 to 3 centimeters on either side, or 1 inch on either side of your pucker, and go ahead and ease that in again. This is a great way to attach your sleeves. And I believe most of Tilly's patterns attaches the sleeve this way. It's very easy and beginner friendly. So of course, it's a great way to attach your sleeves. So again, make sure you do that. And of course, once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and trim the seam allowance and overlock or serge my seam allowance. If you don't have a serger or a overlocker, all you have to do is just do an overcast stitch on your machine. So makers, I am going to show you how to do a balloon sleeve. So I'm going to put my dress off to the side. So you have a rather large sleeve and you have, again, you have your notch at the shoulder, you have your 2 notches that indicate the back, and you have your notch that indicates the front. And then you also have a notch at the bottom of your sleeve. So what we're going to do is we are going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches from notch to notch. All right, 3 rows of gathering stitches. And gathering stitches means that we are going to use the longest stitch on our machine. And we are going to use straight stitch for this, straight stitch makers, because we are gathering our sleeves and also we are going to leave our threads long. Again, 3 rows of gathering stitches, meaning that we are not gonna lock our stitches either at the start or at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how does that look now. So makers, look at my stitch length on my machine. Right? It's 5 millimeters. I'm also using a straight stitch, right? And then I am keeping my threads long just because I want to make sure that I have enough thread to gather. So just make sure that your fabric stays straight. And makers, there's my other notch, and that's where I'm going to stop. And again, I'm going to leave my threads long. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut those, right? Oops. So that's 1 row of stitches. And makers, I'm using a different thread so you can see it, right? And again, another row. And makers, I take these gathering stitches out once I sew my sleeve in. So again, that's 2 rows. And Tilly's recommending that you do 3. So go ahead and do 3 rows of gathering stitches at the top of your sleeve from double notch to your single notch, and that is from side to side, right? And then we are also going to do 2 rows of gathers at the bottom of our sleeve, or actually Tilly recommends that you do 3 rows of gathers at the bottom of your sleeve. So go ahead and do that now for your balloon sleeves if you are attaching your balloon sleeves. And again, if you're not doing balloon sleeves, go ahead and skip this part. All right, makers, so I went ahead and did my 3 rows of gathering stitches. See those right there, really long stitches, and then I left my threads long on both sides, right? And then I also did gathering stitches at the bottom of my balloon sleeve. And makers, what you want to do is you want to pull on those long strings, right? And then your sleeve is going to start to gather. So just pull and kind of just use your fingers to move the gathers. down the sleeve. And makers, you really want to make sure that all of your gathers are even. What do I mean by that? So I'm still not done gathering my stitches, but you see how I have a lot of gathers here and none here? You really want to make sure that all your gathers are really nicely distributed on the sleeve. And it may take you a little bit just to adjust, and it's okay. See. All right, I like the way that looks. And makers, same thing down by the cuff area where we're gonna attach the cuffs. So again, just pull on those gathering stitches. Makers, I went ahead and did the gathers on my sleeve at the top and also at the bottom, and I went ahead and just pulled on those gathers. So now I want you to grab your dress. And makers, we are going to attach this the same way as we attached our sleeve. So we have 2 notches for the back, and we have a notch for the front, and we also have our shoulder seam. So makers, again, you want to make sure that you have right sides together, right? And that you are matching those notches. Same exact way that we did for our regular sleeve. So I have my double notch right there, right? You want to pin. Then I also have my notch in the center, and I'm looking for it. Hold on, makers. Right there is my notch. And I also have a notch for the front. You really want to match those for your regular sleeve and for your balloon sleeve, whichever one you are doing. Right? So once you match those, you can go ahead and pin the rest of the sleeve. Makers, it's really important that all your gathers are evenly distributed. If they're not, you may have your sleeve may be too, might have too much gathers in one spot and then flat on another. So you really want to make sure that your gathers are pretty even, right? And again, just pin. Use as many pins as you need. And I'm not worried about these gathering stitches just because once I put my sleeve in, I can just pull on those and just take them out, right? Because they're not locked in. So again, make sure that your fabric is running straight. Right? So makers, same way. I want you to go ahead and stitch. If you are doing your balloon sleeve, same exact way, makers, but this time you will have some gathers, right? Just kind of like have a little fun with your sleeves. So once you have your sleeved in pin, same way as a regular sleeve, go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and all the way to the end. And makers, I'm going to baste my sleeve in because I'm going to be using the regular sleeves, but I want to see what they look like. So, all right, makers, go ahead and attach your balloon sleeve if you are doing the balloon sleeves. Go ahead and do that now. And makers, when I am attaching a balloon sleeve, I usually use a tailor's awl just to keep my gathers straight, right? So if you have to adjust while you are sewing, you can just do so. It's a nice little tool to have. Again, make sure that my fabric is straight, right? It also helps me to just feed my fabric. Makers, this is what my gather sleeve look like. And I want to show you, I want to make sure that you look at this closely. So my gathers are on my sleeve and my sleeve only, all right? That is when you know you have a good gathered sleeve. Again, my gathers are only on my sleeve and not on my bodice, all right? So makers, that is how you attach a balloon sleeve to your dress. And this is my regular sleeve, right? And then it's my balloon sleeve. So makers, go ahead and attach your sleeves, whichever one you are going to do. I'm actually going to do a regular sleeve, but I can see how I would love a balloon sleeve later on. So pick one of the two. Makers, so again, I attached my sleeves and I hope you did too. And makers, don't forget to press. I went ahead and finished my sleeves and I pressed them towards the sleeve. So now that we got that done, we are going to go ahead and close the sides of our dress. So I want to make sure that you match those seams for your sleeve and that you pin, and then that you pin that side, right, makers? So I went ahead and pinned my sleeve, and now I'm going to pin the side of my dress. Makers, just keep pinning. And makers, this is a great time if you want your dress perhaps a little bit looser or a little bit tighter. Now is your chance, right? And if you are going to try it on and perhaps you feel like you're going to need to make some adjustments, just go ahead and baste your seams. But I am pretty good. I know which way I'm going. So go ahead and pin both sides of your dress, right? Here it is, both sides of my dress. Make sure that you don't catch your pockets on the sides. And go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget the back stitch at the start. Keep going, right? Make sure you pivot and all the way to the end. Go ahead and do that now for both sides of your dress. Makers, so I went ahead and attached my side seams, and I still have to give it a good press, but makers, I want to make sure that when you are attaching your you are closing the side seams on your dress, that your underarm seam for your sleeve and your dress, that they match, right, on both sides. Makers, really important that you do. That is what starts making your clothes looking a little bit more put together, and as we like to say, a little bit more polished. So now I'm going to put my dress off to the side, and I'm going to grab my sleeve pattern piece, and I'm going to go ahead and match these two sides, right? And I want you to go ahead and pin. Makers, I want you to go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and all the way to the end. And it is going to look like this sleeve that I have here. And makers, we are going to fold this. And just like I told you earlier, you really want to go ahead and just clip some of that fabric and cut it off. You want to fold and, right? Fold and go ahead and give this a really good press. So makers, go ahead and do that now. Do this for both of your sleeves. And makers, your balloon sleeve cuff, go do the same thing. It is the same exact way. It's just a little bit bigger. So go ahead and do that now for both of your sleeve cuffs. So makers, I got my sleeve cuffs done. And now we are going to go ahead and pin these into our sleeves. So I have my, right, my sleeve seam, and I have my cuff sleeve. So I really want to make sure that these two seams match. And makers, and if it feels like your sleeve cuff is smaller than your sleeve, you are correct, right? So you have that notch for the middle, so go ahead and pin there. And what's going to happen when you are sewing these in, you're going to have to stretch your cuff. Again, makers, only your cuff, nothing else. Even see how I'm putting them here? I'm stretching them out just ever so slightly, and I'm going to just pin. Okay. So again, when you are in your sewing machine, you're going to have to stretch your sleeve cuffs, only your sleeve cuffs, ever so slightly. It may be a little tricky to do this on your machine, but just take your time. Okay? So again, if it feels like your sleeve cuff is smaller than your sleeve, you are correct. You're going to have to stretch your sleeve cuff as you are sewing it in your machine. So go ahead and pin both of your sleeve cuffs. Once you do that, I want you to stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters all the way around, And I want to make sure that you backstitch at the start and all the way to the end. And makers, do not forget to use a narrow zigzag stitch for any time that you are working with knits, because remember, especially around the sleeve cuffs, around our neckline, it's going to stretch. So go ahead and do that now for both of your sleeve cuffs. And makers, if you are doing a balloon sleeve, I will show you how to do that, but go ahead and do that now. Makers, and if you are doing a balloon sleeve, right? So I have my gathers at the bottom of my sleeve, and just the exact same way. Actually, I have to do it this way. And again, I want to make sure that I match my two side seams. So we'll start there. And makers, you have a notch in the middle of your cuff. Let's see if I can find mine. And you also have a notch in the middle of your sleeve, right? So you want to make sure that you put that right there. And makers, what you want to do is you want to adjust your gathers, right? So you want to pull in your gathers and gather them some more. And so it fits the inside of your cuff, okay? So again, so if you need to adjust your gathers, move them around just ever so slightly, go ahead and do that. And go ahead and pin. Makers, you do not have to stretch this sleeve cuff as you would with the regular cuff sleeve. So now that you have your sleeve, your balloon sleeve and your sleeve cuff, I want you to go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters. And makers, you do not have to stretch the sleeve cuff for this, because you kind of just gathered that extra fabric around the opening of your sleeve cuff. So go ahead and do that now if you are doing a balloon sleeve cuff. And of course, if you are doing a regular sleeve, you're going to have to stretch your sleeve cuff. Go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and attach your sleeve cuffs. So makers, I'm attaching my sleeve cuff to the end of my sleeves, and again, zigzag stitch, and just go ahead and I am stretching so slightly, but these fit pretty snug on my sewing machine extension, so my machine's almost doing the job for me. But let's say, for example, that you are working with a smaller size and they do not fit. I'm going to show you. So let's say, for example, that you are working with a smaller cuff, right? A smaller size. You are just going to go ahead and put in like this on your machine at the right seam allowance. And as it's stitching, you're going to stretch your sleeve cuff. Only your sleeve cuff and not your sleeve. All right, makers. Makers, so this is my regular sleeve. That's what it looks like, right? Right? You have that, and this is your balloon sleeve. So you have the gathers on the sleeve and not on your cuff. All right, so now that you attach your cuffs, we're going to grab our two pieces for our hembands, and with right sides together, you're going to pin on both sides. So now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch, 1.5 centimeters on both sides of your hembands. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and stitched my hembands, and I went ahead and trimmed right where they fold. And then you want to go ahead and with wrong sides together, make sure those side seams match. Go ahead and pin. Right? And makers, go to your pressing station and give this a really good press. Once you do that, I want you to grab your dress. And if you notice, the hem on your dress is going to be slightly wider than your hemband. So what I want you to do, same thing that we did with our cuffs, I want you to go ahead and match your side seams. Okay, so match right there. Match those side seams. All right. And I always say, ouch. I always say, go ahead and pin. And you are going to have to, just like we did with our cuffs, our regular sleeve cuffs, you're going to have to stretch your hemband ever so slightly. Do not stretch your dress. What you want to stretch is your hemband. So makers, go ahead and pin. And I usually like to just pin right where my middle is at, right? And makers, go ahead and keep pinning all the way around your hemband. Makers, so I went ahead and pinned my entire hemband to my dress's hem. All right, so like I mentioned, when you are stitching, you're going to have to stretch your hemband. Notice how I'm stretching only my hemband and not my dress, okay? Just my hemband so it matches the width of my dress. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters all the way around. Once you do that, I want you to use your serger, or if you don't have a serger, you can go ahead and use an overcat stitch on your sewing machine. And once you're done with that, I want you to give this a really good press with lots of steam. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, once you attach your hemband to the bottom of your dress, make sure that again you use your serger or your overlocker, or if you don't have one, you can do an overcast stitch on your machine. And now just give this a really good press, and makers, you are all done. All right, makers, I hope you enjoyed that sew along. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. I went ahead and linked all the fabric notions that I used to make this pattern as part of Minerva Sewing Kits. Don't forget to sign up for a Minerva Craft Club account. You get a discount on all your orders for 12 months. And of course, once your Billie is made, don't forget to post it on our website with your Flea account. You get to share your makes, get inspiration, and talk to other makers around the world. All right, makers, I will see you next time.